Well, hello everyone, and thanks for joining us. Welcome to the second panel discussion in our series, The World Awakens, where we'll be hearing from a lineup of experts on the challenges and benefits of building distributed teams. I'm David Holland and from Employment Hero, where I focus on helping our clients manage their businesses in the new normal of distributed teams. The World Awakens series has been designed to explore the opportunities and challenges of managing distributed employment, because we believe that businesses that are able to succeed in a remote first world will achieve better outcomes for both the business as well as the employees and create a more sustainable long-term future. I now have the pleasure of introducing our panelists for today. First up is Lara Jaeger, who's head of HR at LinkedIn Australia New Zealand, where she's leading LinkedIn's talent strategy with a focus on supporting business growth. Fleur aims to enable all talent to fulfill their full potential and building a market-leading organisational culture. With over 15 years HR and a background in psychology and commerce, Lara is a passionate and driven leader in people management. Next, we have Fleur Marks, a wellbeing expert, coach, and advocate. She's currently Chief Wellbeing Officer at WellU and founder and curator of the Wellbeing Store. Following her own personal experience with severe ill health, Fleur became a wellbeing expert in her own fight to stay alive. She designed and developed wellbeing programs for 5,500 people across 70 companies at WPP. And since COVID, Fleur has advised companies on how to develop sustainable wellbeing programs and initiatives reflecting the new demands of running a business in a COVID world. Ray Duramus is head of employee wellness at Employment Hero. Prior to joining us, Ray was head of wealth at Pivot, where he helped people focus on reaching their financial goals. His ongoing education focused on social science and psychology, reflecting his passion for a more holistic approach to well-being. So here at Employment Hero, he works to improve the physical, mental, and financial well-being of our 300,000 users by providing education and support to help our users make well-informed decisions in all the most important areas of their life. So welcome to our panel, and thank you very much for joining us. Today's discussion is going to focus on well-being, and I think with the announcement this morning of another snap lockdown for Melbourne, this is very timely and probably something that's going to be with us for some time. So it's a great opportunity to talk about how we connect and stay engaged with our colleagues and our teams as managers and as businesses in this COVID environment. There really are two elements to this. One is maintaining that connection between teams and team members and managers in a remote setup. There's a second area around reward and recognition in that environment, and benefits can sometimes go down that path. We've actually got a specific episode dealing with benefits in the context of reward and recognition next week. So this week, we really want to focus on that well-being of our teams and our leaders and maintaining that connectivity. In terms of some of the feedback that we've had already around this topic, we know that many people are happy and well set up and established and productive in a remote environment. But as somebody observed earlier, it's not a one-size-fits-all approach for each business or indeed each person. So one of the challenges we're hearing is how people manage their work-life balance. And there's two very binary outcomes there. We've got people who are working 18 hours a day and never switching off because they're constantly connected, versus others who might not be coming online. If you've got a team member who's not coming online until 9:30 or has any structure to their day and is losing motivation and focus. So there's some very different challenges that we need to address with this. And hopefully today we'll start to dig into some of those. So with that in mind, to the panel, we usually start these sessions with some context around what distributed employment and remote work means to us. So Lara, perhaps I can kick off with you and ask you about your experience to date with distributed teams and where your business is today.
Yeah, absolutely. Thanks, David. So LinkedIn, as many of you will be aware, is actually a global business. So the concept of remote isn't foreign to us. For example, although I have a responsibility across Australia and New Zealand, I also support teams across our Asia Pacific region. And by default, they are remote to me. And so the ways that we have practiced and worked across regions and across different markets around the world are some of the things that we bring in when we think about how we're operating now by country. And each country, as we know, around the world is in a very different state. I'll talk more specifically to my experience in Australia and with that Australian remit for the purposes of today, just to give it a little bit more context for everyone. But it's, I guess, we are a little ahead outside of the recent announcements with Melbourne, but I think we are across the world a little ahead of the COVID curve in how we've been able to manage it, and as such, our ability to come back into the office. So in Australia right now, we have our office open, and specifically for Sydney for now. I feel like all of this has just changed in the last hour, so pardon if I'm a bit behind the times. I've also been in meetings all day, but our offices are open, and we have empowered our teams to be able to use our offices as they feel fit. As a global business and as a larger business in Australia as well, we've been quite thoughtful around the longer term strategy here. So we haven't gone out and said, everyone's remote, no one needs to come into the office ever again, or everyone must come in the minute the door is open. We've been very thoughtful to make sure that we're driving the right consistent framework when it comes to decision making around how remote is going to work for each of us in our roles, in our teams. And so we're kind of at the tail end now of identifying what that decision-making framework is to ensure that from an employee engagement, from a customer experience, and from a business performance, we're not going to lose any rhythm or routine around how we can best deliver what we need to do each day if we are choosing to be remote. And all of this is going to be by choice, of course. But people will be able to put their hand up and say, I'd love to be able to be remote. Does my role fit for a remote profile? And if so, then let's talk about how that's going to work. So we're sort of at the tail end of that, which is really exciting, and more to come over the next few months. But that's sort of how we're thinking about it now. Firstly, trust and empowerment for people to be able to come in or work remotely as they feel fit. Once we've got that formalized framework and the back-end processes that sit behind it, such as the IT, such as our team norms, all of that sort of component will then support how we are able to work in either remote or a hybrid environment. My sense is it's going to be very much a hybrid environment.
Yeah, right. And you mentioned the word thoughtful there, and it's really interesting because couple of the words that came up last week on repeat were purposeful and deliberate. And I think we can add thoughtful to that. And I think one of the key takeaways from this series is going to be that the most successful organizations are those that deliberately go about planning in a thoughtful manner rather than organically just letting this happening and see what happens. But there we go. Fleur, I might come across to you, and obviously you deal with a lot of businesses and see a lot of different examples. You've got your historical experience with a very large organization, but now you work with a variety of clients. What have you seen in the last 12 months, and where do you think we're at?
I think there's a couple of key trends that I'm observing, depending on, doesn't matter what size of company or what stage they're at with their hybrid, remote, whatever format they're going with. There's a bit of burnout happening out there, and it didn't surprise me to discover, in a Harvard report with about 1,500 respondents across 46 countries, that 89% of us feel that our work life is getting worse, and that we're really 55% of us are struggling to actually balance home and work life. And so I think for me, when I step back from that kind of burnout, a lot of us were burnt out before, but I think it's kind of dialed up. And as we continue to move forward in this way, I think what sort of happened is that as organisations have allowed more meetings and perhaps an unhealthy amount of screen time, the term zoomed out is not uncommon right now. And I think, I read something about, people really wanting our companies to get out of their bedrooms or their lounges. And what I'm noticing with all of this meeting and Zooming and all of that is that people aren't taking breaks. And in fact, you couldn't be closer to your fridge than ever before, yet for some reason, we can't seem to get up and take a lunch break or take a break during the day. We just back to back ourselves into meetings. So I've noticed that there's been a real trend around that where there's kind of, I guess, this heightened anxiety. And the other thing that sort of I've observed in talking to different leaders as well is that all of us are at different stages of our ability to cope and be resilient, depending on our life experience, what our journey's been so far. And some of us are handling it better than others. Some of us are loving it and thriving. Others just can't wait to get that connection back and feel quite isolated. So I've noticed a bit of that. And I noticed the other thing that later in last year and a little bit into this year, I'm still seeing it, is we've lost a bit of play, a bit of fun. It's just all work. And so as leaders, I think we just really need to be conscious to check in a way that's beyond the task, and just keep checking in with people. And the wonderful part about what has happened during this remote working time is that as leaders, we're kind of in each other's houses. So we've got to, whether it's with our clients, with our team, we've actually got to know each other in a perhaps more human way than otherwise. So for me, I think it's really important that as leaders, you step back and create some space now to actually think about, how do I want to continue, when I move into a hybrid environment, what really worked for me during that fully remote time that I want to take into being a leader. So there's just a bit kind of bubbling around, but for me, it tends to sit in way too many meetings, not enough space to rest and renew and reset. And still this underlying heightened anxiety, another change, what's happening now with Melbourne, it's just going to sort of allow people to feel a little bit, they're going to feel a little bit more on edge. So how do you kind of make it okay for people to navigate yet another change and the continual change that we're in?
Yeah, and we're going to come on to some of the ways in which we might help do that. It's interesting you mentioned the zoomed out. I'm burned out, I'm zoomed out. I'm increasingly seeing people who are very happy to use their laptops and their computers to communicate. I very rarely pick up my mobile these days, but a lot of people don't use cameras. And I'm really comfortable with that, because I think if I want to have a conversation with somebody, sometimes I don't need to be looking them in the eye. So that's a really interesting development.
Using the phone is, that old thing.
Yeah.
People for a change instead of mixing it up with the Zoom screen,
Yeah. Walking meetings are coming back too, I noticed. I thought they were a thing of the past, but I'll often go and do a walk outside. But anyway, let's move on. Obviously, last week, Ben Thompson, our CEO and founder, touched on where Employment Hero is at with our journey. And if you want to hear that recording is available on the website. And we'll talk to Ray in a minute about some of the wellbeing initiatives. But I want to move on. And today we are talking about wellbeing. And I think it's a really important context, and no greater reminder than what's happening in Melbourne today, is that this is not something we have to cope with for the next 2 months or 3 months. I think we're all becoming aware that even with a great vaccination program over the next 6 to 12 months around the world, we're still going to be living with flare-ups of this situation for probably the foreseeable future, horizon 1, 6 plus, 12 plus months. So we really do need to pay attention to our teams. And we did get a lot of questions last week about tips and tricks to help keep those teams engaged. So today we want to focus on that. Fleur, I might come back to you on this one in terms of picking up on that point around burnout. What are the key signs as a manager? What are some of the key signs that you can pick up remotely when we're not in the office and we're not seeing people coming in late or going out to lunch in tears or whatever the situation I've experienced? What are some of the tips for picking up on burnout in teams?
I think, if someone's overcompensating and kind of, presenteeism, kind of jumping into stuff that they really don't need to, or you notice that they're pinging at all hours of the day, that would suggest to me that they've lost all boundaries and their lines between work and home are completely blurred and they're on a path that's not going to be sustainable. I think, the silent treatment of people start pulling away and not engaging or connecting on a video call or just in any sort of situation, I think you'll notice that, that might be a sign of overwhelm. Or you just might notice that people are just not their usual self. They might not be I've had a few incidences of, in teams where people have stopped taking care of themselves and started to, really show, I guess, some signs of mental health challenges and trying to deal with the world that they're in. And just, kind of a little bit of a overreaction instead of a response in moments. There are little things that tend to bubble up, I believe, that you can sort of see that perhaps they're not, they're in overwhelm, they're in burnout, they haven't worked out a way to actually navigate it.
Yeah, look, we're very familiar with because of things like Are You OK, David? We're familiar with the idea of reaching out and proactively asking people. Me personally, I'm not very, if somebody asks me that, then unless I know them very well, I'm probably not going to give them an honest answer. Fine, I'm okay, and whatever. But have you had any experience or seen a proactive reaching out where team members can actually register that they're not feeling well in a secure and confidential way?
I've seen more actually from a leader point of view, where there's certain leaders out there right now who are consciously ringing their team by phone and going, how are you? And not taking fine as the easy answer, and digging in a little bit, just, doing real genuine check-ins, or creating like little huddles where they go, what's on your heart, what's on your mind, to kind of pull out from people what's happening for them, but kind of creating, I guess, a safe space where if someone's struggling a little bit, it's okay. And also a lot of leaders, if they're starting to show their own vulnerabilities and going, I don't have all the answers here, I'm not sure how's best, but, actually being human, that what I've noticed is that allows others to go, oh, you too, you haven't quite, oh, you're finding this hard being on screen or whatever it is. So just, I think, I've tended to see it more in a leader situation. A lot of companies have obviously introduced EAP. They've got people trained in mental health first aid to allow for that. But I think where I've seen it more, I guess, powerful with leaders stepping up and actually going, how are you really? And moving away from, kind of the answer. I think there's 14 times we can say fine a day or something ridiculous. We'll say, I'm okay, but actually, how are you really? And so taking that effort across and making it an active discipline as a leader week on week is where I think that environment has really shifted for a lot of companies.
And so sharing your own vulnerability, encouraging people to share theirs. You touched on mental health first aid and EAPs. We might come back to those later if we have time.
Sure.
But Lara, let's come back to LinkedIn. What's happening at LinkedIn in terms of you helping your company, helping you manage your teams? And for context, can you let us know how many people are in the ANZ, the Australian New Zealand team?
Yeah, sure. So we're about 250 roughly in Australia and New Zealand. And some of the ways in which, and I'll talk probably more to what has changed since COVID times in terms of how some of the wellness programs have pivoted, and that's outside just the virtual gym classes and the EAP. But, certainly we spend a lot of time listening to our teams. And I think this is the one piece of advice I would share, is that you as a manager or you as a team member, you're a part of a collective. And as a collective, we are better to ideate, we are better to innovate, and we have the solutions within us. So, what are the ways in which you are constantly having a pulse check on your teams and ensuring that you're keeping across how things are going, on a quarterly basis, for example, versus just a once-off, engagement survey. So we are constantly checking in with our teams on that level. Obviously, at a manager level too, those one-on-ones are super important, but across an organization, when you do have a larger pool of employees to support and manage. So as we do check in, we've heard things like the burnout, the boundaries, the things we've already spoken about. So what are the ways in which we were able to pivot to support people with things, a new program that was created about 12 months ago. And the program was there to really design to support and to spark a little bit of a lift up for people. And so with the place in shelter, with people working from home and being very much in a lockdown situation that we were and continue to still see, what are the ways in which we can give people time and space? So once a month, we have no meeting Fridays, and it's absolutely sacred. So from the CEO right down, if there is a meeting on that Friday, you are questioned, you should be declining it, and there is no expectation that anyone is attending any meetings on that Friday. That's one example. Another example is there was a very particular time, and very much, again, from a global level, but nothing that you couldn't do at a local level as well. When we had huge spikes in cases, we saw EAP rising, mental issues were coming up constantly. So we actually gave people a week off. We gave people a week off as a rest up. And yes, we had the luxury of being able to do that at that time, but the point is, we heard people, they were burnt out, there were no boundaries, and people just needed a true break. Now we're lucky in Australia that we do have things like annual leave for, you know, a lot of our employees and staff that qualify under those sort of obligations. But across the world, they don't always have those sort of, you know, regulations. So we're lucky that we're able to say, right, do you know what, for a day or a week or a long weekend, take that extra time and really step away and recharge. And to Fleur's point, it's got to be leader-led. It's got to be led from the top. And unless your leaders are driving and supporting that program of work, it's all for naught, because it just becomes something that's said and not actually done. The other elements under that program were very much designed around learning and upskilling around resilience. So Fleur mentioned that as well, but we actually had people coming in, you know, from externally and sharing, you know, when they went through the GFC. So we have had times where it's been really tough for certain industries, the economy, the impact that's had on homes and well-being of people. So how do people bounce back after those really rough times? Because for a lot of the less tenured employees that we have, they've never really experienced anything that has had such an impact on their mental wellness. And so really understanding and learning from people from prior experiences was super helpful. Plus, you know, the catalogue of internal courses that we have on LinkedIn Learning. So there's a lot of stuff around there around resilience and boundaries and, you know, mental wellness and well-being. So even getting your team to set aside an hour or two a week to go through and just take some time to help upskill themselves in how they can best manage and cope with these sort of things.
On that point, I can imagine there are those people who leap at that opportunity and don't even have to be disciplined about it, and it comes very naturally. Are there people who don't take advantage of that opportunity and you have to force it on them, or how do you deal with that?
Yeah, absolutely. And I think the thing is, I never quite like the concept of being too forceful, but I think the notion is more around take an hour or two for yourself to think about what are the ways in which you can help to rebalance your life. And if you're stuck, here's some learning courses that might be able to help you. If it's really clear and obvious, share how you're carving out that time. And then, you know, it's the accountability of the team to come back in the next team meeting to say, we're going to go around and we're going to hear what's everyone's done differently from last week, you know, and that's the accountability piece. And it's not one size fits all. Everyone's done that course and tick, now I feel more resilient. You know, it's much more around what's for me and what's that catalogue of support that I have as an employee looks and feels very different for everyone.
Yeah.
David,
sorry.
I was just going to say, David, one other thing that I saw, just building on Lara, really quite amazing stuff you're doing there. One company I work with, a parent, really early into, you know, sort of lockdown, they established what's called a power hour. So every day at 2:00, there's no meetings, no pinging. It's an opportunity to create space to do your work, to think and to have some time out. And they've done that consistently every day since very early on in April last year. And I think that just really allowed people to have permission and space to actually, if they're eating their lunch, that's fine. If they're doing work, that's great. But actually to stop kind of, you know, having all these meetings and just some little bit of space to just process, digest, work, do whatever you need to. But it just really has helped people sustain it over time, which I thought was just another great initiative I've observed.
Yeah, terrific. And look, we just touched on something there, which we'll come on to in later episodes around goal setting. I think rather than trying to as a general rule, rather than trying to prescribe how and when and what, we're much better today than we were a year ago at holding people accountable for the outcome. So actually saying, okay, you're going to set some side of time to achieve this outcome, and then actually coming back in a team meeting saying, okay, what was the outcome of your hour of self-reflection? And we'll talk about goal settings later, but that's something we'll dig into. Ray, in terms of some of the tools, so you're responsible for helping our 300,000 users stay well and healthy, and you started that role right in the middle of the COVID pandemic. But I know that you're a very passionate person in this area, and you've taken to it like a duck to water. But what are some of the specific tools that you're seeing and the trends in adoption of those tools?
Thanks, Dutchy. Look, I would say that there's a profound sense of understanding from the organizations who we work with about how important this stuff is. A lot of what I'm hearing from HR managers in the small medium businesses that we work with is that they fully get it. They understand. We can throw stats at them like burnout creates 174% reduction in productivity and all those sorts of things. But what they're actually asking for help with are how can I get it. How do I talk to my team about this stuff, and how can I be comfortable with the tools to start to intervene? What I don't want to do is intervene in the wrong way and create a bigger problem. And to that end, I would probably just call out to all the HR managers that are on here is to just take that pressure off yourself for a minute. And I think everybody would understand and empathize that we are figuring out this stuff as we go along. Like, there is no rule book for this. One of the biggest things that teams respond to is just knowing that their managers care and that they're trying to work on it. So I would say don't go for the most best solution and beat down that interior engineer in you and look for the most perfect solution. And just starting to look at this space is commendable, and I'm sure your team would be receptive. To that end, there are a number of low cost tools that HR managers can start to use with their teams. And the first one is that these aren't new, but certainly more important now than ever. The first one is starting meetings with celebrations. Takes 30 seconds just around what was awesome that happened today or yesterday. Doesn't need to be work related. An extension of that might be calling out or shouting at a team member about something that they've done which was extraordinary. Again, doesn't need to be massive or groundbreaking, but just something that you appreciated. I think we need to be more intentional in those types of conversations, because these are the things that you would potentially talk about in the lunchroom, which you can't anymore, right? So let's just be a bit more conscious there. The second one there is happiness surveys. Again, this isn't new. We do this so frequently in Employment Hero, and we encourage all of our organizations to do the same thing. It's just a temperature check on how your organization is feeling. With that, one of the biggest things is have a numerical 1 to 10, how are you feeling? But B, and this is probably more important, is to have a free text field about exactly what drove them to that score. Again, what that says for me as an employee of a business like Employment Hero is that, yes, Employment Hero are keen to understand how I'm feeling, but B, they're actually keen to understand where the opportunities are to intervene and get a little bit more insight there. So I can say that even though we don't know what the outcome of that survey might be, the fact that I'm getting asked is enormous. I've got a whole bunch of stuff. I don't want to take up too much.
Yeah, and look, I think Lara mentioned earlier that I think she called it a pulse survey. We call it a happiness survey, but there are lots of tools available that allow you as a manager or as a business leader to get a temperature check very quickly. They're designed to take less than 10 seconds to answer. And whether you're an organization's getting a 6 or an 8 is almost less important than what was it last month. Where am I heading? Ray, I just will ask you one question, because I know you shared recently internally the results of the survey where you asked our users what kind of benefits they were that they wanted. Can you just mention the top 1 or 2? Like, what were the standouts for you?
Sure thing. So for completeness, what we do is once a quarter ask our users how they're feeling. We've got a Wellness at Work index. If you Google Wellness at Work 2021, you'll see our most recent report. The last one closed at the end of March, so we deep dive in April. And the biggest thing, which isn't groundbreaking, again, it's so remarkable how simple this stuff is, but it was paid company team lunches. So this isn't new, but when as an HR manager, I can imagine overthinking about like, how do we intervene? How do we make sure that we're replicating what the world was? But actually, it's really simple, and the psychologists among us will understand that this is just core needs. There are easy ways to do that. Through Employment Hero, we have gift cards, so like Uber Eats of the world, where you can distribute those amongst your team, but a version of that would exist for almost all of us. So very, very low cost intervention and a good way to connect.
Terrific. On those virtual lunches, those team lunches, for those of you in Melbourne, the idea that we've been trying to progress here is if you're able to give everyone in the office or everyone in your team a $20 Uber Eats voucher, or if you're in central Melbourne, $25, arrange for everyone to order their favorite takeaway for a dinner or a lunch and get onto Zoom, cameras off, and just have a chat. And having the food and sharing that experience just completely changes the dynamic. I'm seeing some questions coming through, so we're going to try and get to those shortly. In the meantime, I just wanted to see here, Ray, can you do me a favor? Can you jump online and check to see if happiness surveys are included in our free plan? Because we've got a specific question about that. So if you wouldn't mind checking that out. We've got some other questions here. We might go to that. Fleur or Lara, did you have any observations on terms of specific tools and tricks and wellness tools? Perhaps we can revisit the EAP. Fleur, do you want to just explain what an EAP is and what a common one might look like?
Sure. An employee assistance program is there to confidentially allow someone to ask for help. And typically an EAP will have a team of trained psychologists, or often now since COVID, they've got a platform of wellbeing training and, tips and tricks to help beyond just a counselling call. And often EAP isn't just for life stuff. It can also be for things like financial planning or, diet or whatever. But generally, I think employee assistance is great for helping people when they're navigating change and are struggling for whatever reason. And what's happened more and more, I think, is just people are starting to utilise those platforms just to get support. But I wanted to say, David, something that's kind of just bubbled up in my thinking while we've been talking around, I guess, an observation around language as leaders and just in terms of how we use our words during change. I think the back to normal or return to work, all of those words, I think, a really, really important nuance. Ray, you were kind of stimulating that in my thinking as I was thinking about sort of sentiment or happiness surveys. What you say and even those sentences indicate to people what your intent is. So as leaders, as companies, thinking about how you phrase, whether it's the new norm or whatever, I personally can't stand that. But what is the way in which you're going to shape the future and what language you're going to use? Because I think that is really important to people as they navigate transition and change. So I just wanted to add that in there.
Yeah. Terrific. Lara, I think it was you that mentioned the first aid officer, the mental health first aid officer. Was that your comment? Do you have those at LinkedIn, and can you describe a little bit more about what they are?
Yeah, I don't know that I mentioned it prior, but we yeah, was it you, Fleur? Yeah, we do certainly have them actually as well, and that's something that we had a couple of years now, which has been really helpful because it was pre-COVID. So all of that training and support has been there, and that's really just peers leaning into peers and knowing that there are people outside of managers and external help such as EAP that can come and have a chat. And we're very lucky we have what we call employee resource groups, and again, they're groups of team members that have come together because there's a passion around a certain field or domain, or a diverse or inclusion perspective. So we have ERGs for parents, and within that there may be a mental health officer who can then support and lean in on some of the challenges that parents have had during COVID times. So it's sort of a myriad of support system that we have here, but right from that peer to manager to external, and just continuing to support those supporters is also really important for us as an organisation, because often there is a lot of burden that's taken in. And we've certainly seen that with our manager population. All of a sudden they had to become experts in wellness and mental health. And it was certainly something that peaked that we didn't anticipate. And so to be able to pivot and support our managers and leaders during those times has been super critical for us. And some of the very simple ways we have done it is by sharing tools and tricks and tips that have been mentioned so far. We get managers to come together and to share, how are you going? How are you tracking? For example, in our Pulse results, we see that Manager support as a measure that we have consistently has stayed really consistent and it remains quite strong. And so kudos to our managers because they're doing a really fabulous job in really tough times.
Yeah.
But how do we support them and bring them together as a community to help to share and to shed some of that stuff and I say stuff quite deliberately because it can feel quite heavy on you. You know, when you're trying to shelter and support as well. But there's some very simple tools and tricks that we share with our managers, you know, to impart within team structures and the way that they use their language and, you know, little techniques that can make a big difference for them and their teams.
Do mental health first aid officers receive specific training? Do they have specific background? Yeah, okay. So that's a great, and I think, sorry. Flo?
The New South Wales government actually have a program you can get accredited. It's also for teenagers as well. It's not, you can do an adult one or a teenage one. So you can actually get accredited and then train your team as well. But it's government supported.
Yeah, I think it's worth looking into because I think in terms of understanding and picking up on when wellness is becoming an issue, it's really important to have people who are experts and qualified, as well as being leader-led and being aware of it. Maribel has made the comment that they get a birthday tea paid for at their organisation, which is a great idea. She's also shared some other comments about the deliberate and purposeful way in which they use their daily check-in. So I don't know what organisation Maribel's from, but it sounds like they're knocking it out of the park. Lara, quick question is, was the week off when you shut down for a week, was that taken out of annual leave? Was that just forcing annual leave or was that an additional benefit?
It was an additional benefit. Like extremely grateful and blessed to work for an organization where they're able to do that. But this again was a global initiative, and so not all you know, entitlements around leave operate the same across each country either. So that's another dynamic. But even just having that, you know, once a month off or once a quarter off, you know, as an additional day can make a huge difference, and the tokenism that goes alongside that, you know. And like, let's be honest, by a Friday afternoon, we know productivity is going to be dipping. It's been a big week. It's always a big week. You know, to give people that day or that half a day as something that they can be completely guilt-free can really, you know, speak volumes.
Yeah.
Just on that, sorry, Dutchy, there's a real simple one. And again, this doesn't need to take up a lot of time for organizations, but a small business that I actually first started working in had this awesome rule where once we ticked over to summer, the first day that reached, spring, the first day that reached 32 degrees, whatever time of day that reached, wherever it was, done. We shut the doors and we were out. It's so simple, and like, it was only a few hours, but the fact that I'm talking about it 10 years later has to say something, right?
Yeah, look, it's a great observation on the positive side. We did have one question through or observation through, which I think we should acknowledge, which is in this particular case, this is an organisation that works supporting children and family, vulnerable people. We know in our healthcare industry that a lot of businesses, even if they had the financial capacity, they may not have the practical operational capability to do this. I don't have a specific answer to that other than to acknowledge that one of the themes that we see coming through this is it's not one solution fits all. And we had this conversation before we came online today. Everything's going to be different, and we'll try and help everyone where we can. But certainly these ideas, if they're available to you, then we strongly suggest them. Ray, just while you're up on my screen, did you manage to get an answer about our happiness survey?
Yeah, just typing an answer to the individual now. So not part of the free. I will shout out though that there are free tools available, Google Forms and SurveyMonkey and the like.
But certainly our happiness survey is available to our clients, many of whom are on the call today. So if you haven't activated that, reach out to our support and HR education team, and they will happily help you activate that and get it live.
I think just to close off the conversation around having time off, we certainly from a global perspective had teams that couldn't just have time off either. So a lot of our product, our engineering, our trust teams on the platform continue to operate. So it's less about everyone is, you know, where we can, let's take that time. But, you know, for those teams that are core and that we need to flex, they just bank that time and they get to use it at a different opportunity. So no one should miss out. It's just when you take it and how it's taken, of course, can be different.
Yeah, Yeah, and that's great insight. Sharon is thinking the Uber Eats team lunches could be a great idea. So just in terms of tools, and we're not necessarily here to plug Employment Hero. We've actually got a mechanism in the platform. If you're familiar with it, you can actually distribute Hero dollars to your team. They can use that to acquire an Uber Eats card, and in fact, you get a 5% discount. And then you can arrange all of the joining up and the connection through the usual Zoom and other channels. One observation I'd make is that not everyone can take lunches, so you may want to consider a dinner. But then, parents with kids, so you've got to again make that work for your situation. We did have some questions from last week. Sorry, I'm just a little bit all over the place here. I just wanted to touch on a couple. Career development in a remote environment, because I think well-being is often come from how comfortable and proud you are of your own contributions and your own growth. Fleur, is there anything in particular that you've seen around managing career development for your team when they're not with you every day in the lunchroom? How do you pick up on that?
I definitely have observed that the more we're working on our own, we are thinking more about ourselves and our development, right? So it's sort of definitely been a common trend that people are starting to go, well, what's my career look like? And Aquiant had a research study where it's 43% of people are intending to leave their role within the next 3 to 6 months. So it's kind of scary numbers, and we're starting to see it in different businesses where people are going, what, I want to be a florist, I don't want to do this, I want to change my life, I want to whatever. And so keeping your best people means that you need to continue to have career development conversations, you need to continue training them, you need to continue talking to them about how they're going to progress regardless of where they're working in order to retain them so that they understand. And a lot has changed for us, right? So you might have, be really enjoying being remote, and it might have, changed how you view your work world. So having those conversations around what motivates and drives you and what's really important to you in order for us to retain you and keep you motivated and keep you growing and progressing. I think those conversations are critical right now because people are thinking about leaving, and it's not unique to the industry I work in. It is across the board right now. So I think even more, I think we sort of fell back a little bit from doing those chats because we were kind of navigating other stuff. But now is the time to start bringing those conversations back into them understanding, well, what is it? How am I going to grow here? What does that look like in this new world? In this way of being.
Yeah, and look, I think there are plenty of tools in this space as well to help you. Performance reviews, one-to-ones. In Employment Hero, our performance review is up and down. So both parties, manager and employee team member, get the opportunity to review themselves and then come together and do that. There are specific career development tools as well. So I think that's worth looking into. I've got another question here from last week from Clem, who I can see is also active with some great thoughts today. Last week, he asked this question, and Lara, I might ask you about your experience here in terms of the working from home and losing ties with the organization. So people who are a little bit more introverted, and they're not having that opportunity forced upon them to talk to the person next to them and keep engaged, and maybe start prioritizing lifestyle over work was Quinn's question from last week. Does anyone have any, Lara, do you want to have any observations around that? It's a tough one.
Yeah, sure. So again, I think this is where we go back to that old one size doesn't fit all, but really understanding what's important for each employee, but then also what's important for the team and the team dynamics. And you need to find the right balance of both. And so, for example, it may be that somebody's really comfortable to work from home and their role allows them to do that and they're just as productive. But as a team, that connection, those connection moments and those moments that matter where we do get to come together and share just goodness of being a really amazing, diverse team that can innovate and create and just come together as humans still is important and exists. And so let's look at ways in which we can continue to drive a new ritual around that. So once a month, let's take, the last Friday of the month and come together and share lunch, at a central place. And that's something that everyone is invited to. We'd love to see everyone come and just help to harness, the goodness that exists. So I think these things always have to be optional. I think, unless you're an organization where you want to be very forceful about it, certainly for us, it's very much more on an optional basis. But I think, you know, with that team and the diversity, often people are going to opt into those opportunities.
Yeah, specific question for you. Again, another question, but it touches on those sort of moments that you just spoke of. Induction. So whether you are in a forced lockdown, as some of us have been and are, or whether you're going fully remote first and you want to do away with an office, how do you manage induction in a remote environment? Have you got anything specific around that?
Yeah, so we've been doing virtual induction since COVID, since the beginning of COVID, which is over a year now. The most interesting piece about this, and this is a whole nother series, I think, around culture, but is that the people that we have seen start pre and post COVID have both said how strong the culture feels. So there are some people who are working for us who have never stepped foot in an office, or who are only now just stepping foot in an office, because we've had our offices closed for majority of this time. You know, and certainly, you know, in certain parts of the world, they have never stepped into an office. Our head of HR globally started during the COVID times, and I don't know that she's yet stepped into the San Francisco office yet, because they're only just about to reopen. So, but from her mouth and from the mouth of new starters, you know, in Australia, culture is palatable. We can see it, we can feel it, because those induction experiences, they're more than just read up on these things and here's a bunch of material and go and do some, you know, extra work post this and get to know the org structure. It's about the way that, you know, the look, the feel, the way things are done around here, the policies, the practices, you know, the things such as no meeting Fridays. What does that say about the organizational culture? It certainly says that we care a lot about our people and that talent is number one priority for us. And the burnout is real and we are moving ourselves to support that. So those little moments, I think, yes, induction, sometimes it's just going to have to happen virtually when you've got remote workers or where we are in lockdown times. Doesn't mean it takes away from the experience and doesn't mean that it takes away from, you know, the essence of what the organization is all about.
Yeah, terrific. All right. And I think reward and recognition in next week, we'll start to dig into that in more detail. I've got a question here about the percentage of people thinking of leaving an organisation in the next 3 to 6 months. Ray, was that a stat that you threw out? Can you?
That was me, actually. It's from an Aquion study that was published, I think, in January or February this year. They looked at about 1,600 Australian workers, and there was 5 key insights, and one of them was about people wanting to leave because they've had a chance to rethink. So happy to, you know.
Yeah, look, I just want to talk about that whole area, less about people leaving. I think the whole concept of well-being and next week employee engagement addresses retention. I do want to touch on the fact that going remote, one of the key benefits that we've highlighted last week and we'll touch on is the ability to recruit more broadly. Because as we all know, all of us on this call and most of our listeners are from Australia, but we do have some from overseas. We are experiencing a massive talent shortage at the moment, and we're experiencing it as a business ourselves. Our clients are experiencing it, and the ability to recruit people who might have once come over on a visa, and we're talking about, you know, senior technology people, special security people, sales people. We no longer have to employ them from down the street. So the remote work has opened up that opportunity. But I think retention we'll talk about a little bit more specifically next week. I'm getting some messages here. Lara, in terms of search, I don't know if this is something you can help us with or if you've got the data to hand. What is happening around LinkedIn activity that gives you any insights to this? Are we seeing more people changing their status to open to new ideas? Are we seeing people switching their options to remote? What is your platform telling us?
Yeah, I mean, unfortunately, I don't have the data at hand, but the platform is certainly telling us that people are looking for opportunities to network now more than ever. And being the online platform that we are, we know that the natural world has now pivoted a lot more online than it ever has before. And so there's a lot of activity, there's a lot of people networking. I think sort of to, you know, some of the stats that Fleur was alluding to around the market picking up from a talent perspective, absolutely. And I think there's a few things there. I mean, we know now that younger generations are moving more and more in shorter spaces of time through roles and through careers. There's not so much of that long standing, I'm going to stay loyal to an organization for 15 years anymore. But also now coming out of COVID and we can see the economy bouncing back, employment's opening up again. And so I feel like there's a bit of a double surge going on around the economy's feeling stronger. I'm feeling happy to take a risk. And all those people that were thinking about a career change last year that put off are now looking into that as well. And so there's certainly, you know, from a jobs perspective, that's picking up on the platform. Certainly more people applying for roles, and all of that's now starting to traject all the way up. So from all accounts, including our platform, certainly a shift moving in the market.
Yeah. I'm tempted to ask you about your challenge recruiting at the moment, but I know retention isn't much of an issue. You seem to have great retention experience, but I think that's through hard work as much as anything. But all right, just looking for some more questions here now. Yeah, we're continuing to get a lot of questions about companies that have to have this hybrid situation. So construction and hospitality who have to have on-site workers, versus those who have an office space and have the opportunity to work from home or work from anywhere. I'll just flag, unless Lara or Fleur, you've got some specific comments about that, I will just flag that we have actually written a blog on this, and we'll be making it available through some of the comms around this webinar series through the website. But it is a tough one, you've got to admit. Fleur, I don't know if your experience with clients who are trying to manage on-site versus those, and whether that creates some area of resentment.
I don't know if it's resentment, but I think there's a definite inclusion workplace strategy you need to put in play, because those that are in an office know, you know, things happen by nature of human beings. So how do you keep everybody included and connected to the business who may not be back in the office or able to connect in that way? So I think for me, it's just really having a really clear workplace strategy that goes, these are the behaviors to define how we're going to manage this hybrid, or the way in which we're doing it, so that people go, okay, so when this conversation happens, how do I bring everyone else into that loop, so people don't feel distance, they don't feel disconnected. I think it's really a conscious choice and behavior, but you actually got to write a strategy around it and how you're going to do it, because it doesn't just happen.
Yeah.
That's my view on it.
As I said, we'll be including a blog addressing the hybrid teams, or the different types of teams. I think some of the themes that came out of that writing that is purposefulness, deliberate, setting things deliberately, driving inclusiveness and equality where you can. You can't do it everywhere. Lara, you wanted to add to that?
Look, and I was just going to go back to my earlier point, which is, you know, speak to your teams, get some high level insights through a survey, and then engage your team on it. You know, your team often are the ones that have this information, have the knowledge, and can share, you know, their perspectives and thoughts on how it can best work. And so don't feel like you as a manager or a leader or an HR manager have to have all the answers. I mean, that's just, that's put a lot of pressure on ourselves if that's how we think. So to bring people together, to share, to ideate, and to say, look, this is what the high level insights are telling us through maybe an anonymous survey. Let's dig deeper, and how can we overcome these things so that there's an equal playing field, or that we are ensuring that we all get the consistent experience with X, Y, and Z. And you'd be so surprised about how creative people can be when you can support them and bringing them together with ideas.
Yeah. And experiment, right? Like just
absolutely
stuff out. Like you don't have to have it all perfect on the first try. Like give it a go, see if it works, you know, check in with everyone, and then go, okay, no, that didn't quite work. Let's try something else, you know. Be open to experimenting. We don't know the exact perfect answer.
On that note, I'm going to take one more comment from Clem from the chat. He talked about whether it's time for society to have a radical rethink about how we work. You know, he's talking about different working methodologies in terms of time on, time off. Just as a general observation, the last few minutes we've got, we know that although we may never leave a post-COVID world, and that the world that we will experience 12 months from now is probably still going to be fundamentally different in some positive and negative ways to where we were 18 months ago. But do you guys think from a big picture social perspective, the social contract between governments and unions and employees and employers, is this a turning point for the world and the way we work? Fleur?
I hope so. I mean, I think, you know, I think the 9-to-5 thing's been dead for a while. We just haven't really trusted that was going to be okay. I think that our younger generation, they don't work perhaps in the more traditional manner at their best, you know, and just figuring out how we all work at our best is where I think we need to look at what does that really look like, and, you know, I know how difficult that would be to define a new way or whatever, but I really hope this brings change for good, and that people are allowed to, you know, continue with flexibility, continue to be trusted to do their jobs as adults and capable at what they do. But why not change some stuff? Why not just sort of shake it up a bit? and see what happens.
Yeah, +1 to that. And I think there's certainly, you know, there is a bit of a war on talent, particularly for some skills and industries. And there are a lot of organizations which have gone fully remote, and there are a lot of organizations which allow full empowerment. And we know from the data, both globally and Australia centric, that everybody is now saying, I'm not coming back into an office when I'm an office worker 5 days a week anymore. No, that's not, like, I'm done with that. I'll be at home 2 to 3 days a week. And if you're not going to give me that, I'll go somewhere else.
Yeah.
And that's the reality of a situation. And so I think we've got to be very careful that, you know, with the talent issues that we do have going on, and to attract and retain the right talent, we've got to give them the trust and empowerment, because we were forced into it. It seems to have worked. Why would we go back?
And connect their purpose to your company purpose, like
Right.
bringing
Yeah.
that back in, right? Like, let's connect them now, because that's where it's, you know, whilst we're in this mode, I think it's an important opportunity for us.
And that applies really specifically to those dual environments where you've got work from anywhere and site-based. Having that common company connection, whether it's through an OKR or a mission, and revisiting that and celebrating progress towards that, is one way to try and keep different groups together. There's a bunch of questions coming in with technical questions around work from home allowances and some legal questions around employment. We will get to those in future episodes. There is one specific question around how we cope with people who are employed overseas on Aussie contracts or whatever. I will say that we at Employment Hero have launched our Global Teams service. So if you are thinking about having people overseas, you want to have someone that can't come here on a visa, the Global Teams service at Employment Hero will help you. Other than that, I think we're just about out of time. We will take any questions that we haven't been able to address today, and we will write answers to them and get them up online and send those out to everybody. Fleur and Lara and Ray, of course, thank you very much for your time today. I think we've managed to move this conversation a little bit forward, but I don't know if either of you have any further closing remarks about the journey and where you think it's going. Where do you think we'll be?
First, Lara, you go first.
No, look, I'm just excited. I don't think it's ever been more an exciting time to be a leader or to be within HR. The world is changing, you know, dramatically, accelerated at a faster rate than we've ever seen. And, you know, our ability to continue to iterate and to innovate and to keep up super excites me. And I can't wait to see where this is going to take us in the next few years. So strap on is all I can say.
Awesome. And Fleur?
Take care of your leaders. A lot of them are really holding space for, you know, what's unknown, and they need space and capacity and support. So just take care of them, you know, and the rest will kind of ripple out and follow through. So that's my kind of message, really, is take care of these wonderful leaders that you've got.
And finally, thank you for that. And finally, Ray, your closing remarks.
No, just wanted to shout out and say congratulations to everyone who's taken the time today, and you know, who are interested in understanding how they can better deliver this type of offering to their team. It's great.
Awesome. All right, I'm sorry, I'm just desperately trying to grab the Q&A to save, but thank you very much to each of our panelists, and as Ray said, thank you and to everyone who's joined us, and well done on taking this step. We've got another episode next week. We'll be exploring reward and recognition, and I think some of the themes of engagement will continue in that. So we look forward to welcoming you all back, and in the meantime, thank you very much for your time, and we'll see you around. Thanks all.